r/ProRevenge, my sister abandoned me, so I exposed her paternity lies. Hashtag chunk 1, the phone call that changed everything. I was microwaving leftover pasta when I heard Amber's voice drift down the hallway, and something in her tone made me pause. Not the usual annoyed big sister tone she perfected over the past 12 years. Something colder. Sharper. No, listen to me, she hissed into her phone. I'm serious. Once she gets 25 in June, that trust is locked. I'll get the full payout, and then we're done. I'm done. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon dripping red sauce onto the tile floor. The microwave beat, 3 sharp, accusing sounds, but I didn't move. I don't care if she cries, Amber continued. She's not my responsibility. She was supposed to be temporary. Do you know how much her share costs me every month? The medical insurance, the food, the phone bill, she laughed, and it wasn't a sound I'd ever heard from her before. Hollow. Cruel. Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're stuck with your dead parents' baggage. The wooden spoon clattered into the sink. My hands were shaking. I pressed my back against the kitchen counter, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Amber had raised me since I was 12 years old. When our parents died in that car accident, a moment that still felt like it happened yesterday even though I was 24 now, she was the one who held me while I screamed. She was the one who skipped her junior year of college. She was the one who fought with my aunt about custody, who moved us into that tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, who worked doubles at the hospital where she was a nurse to keep us afloat. Or at least, that's what I thought. I don't give a shit about guilt, she said into the phone, and I heard her bedroom door creak open. She was moving around. Look, Marcus is texting about child support again, and if I play this right, wait, I thought you said you handled the DNA thing? My stomach dropped like I'd just stepped off a cliff. No, you promised me those results were destroyed, she snapped. You said no one would ever, fine. Fine. We'll figure it out. But after June, that's it. I'm done being the sacrificial sister. I'm done playing the victim. I'm taking what's mine and I'm leaving. The call ended. I heard the distinctive click of her hanging up, followed by the sound of her flopping onto her bed, the mattress springs groaning in protest. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My mind was ricocheting between 1,000 different moments, re-examining them through this new, horrifying lens. Marcus. She had a 2-year-old son with Marcus. Or, wait. Did she? My older sister had 2 children, Ethan was 5, and little Marcus was 2. Marcus Sr. had been gone from the picture for about 18 months, and Amber had told me he'd chosen to walk away from his responsibilities. She'd said it with this martyr's expression while I rubbed her back and told her she was strong, that she'd be okay. That we'd be okay. But now I was remembering other things. The way Marcus had shown up at our apartment 6 months ago, angry and confused, demanding to speak with Amber about the truth. She'd hidden me in my room and I'd heard raised voices, heard him say something about lies and another guy, and then the door had slammed. I'd never gotten the full story. Amber had just said he was being abusive and volatile, that I shouldn't worry about it. Had he been telling the truth? And what did she mean about DNA results? My phone sat on the counter, dark and innocent. I picked it up and navigated to the family group chat, just me, Amber, and our Aunt Michelle. The last string of messages was from a week ago, when Amber had posted a photo of the 3 of us together. Nothing means more to me than family, she'd written. These 2 are my whole world. She was talking about me. I was part of her whole world. Or I had been, anyway. Until June. Until I turned 25 and the inheritance trust from our parents' estate was released to me directly instead of being controlled by Amber as my guardian. Our parents had left us each a substantial amount, $50,000 each, plus the house they'd owned outright, which was worth around $400 grand. Amber had been managing everything for me, paying for my college tuition, my living expenses, everything. I'd always assumed it was coming from her nurse's salary plus some contribution from the trust. Apparently, I was the contribution. I felt sick. Actually, dizzy sick, the kind where your vision starts to pixelate around the edges. The microwave was still humming. The pasta had probably congealed into a solid mass by now. I set my phone down very carefully on the counter and tried to think clearly. Amber had been lying to me. 4 years. About the children's paternity, about financial support from men, about... Wait. What else? What else had been a lie? My brain felt like it was moving through molasses, but I forced myself to piece it together. She'd said I could stay with her as long as I needed. She'd said she loved me. She'd said that when our parents died, keeping me safe was the most important thing in the world to her. All of it had an expiration date stamped on it. June 14th. My 25th birthday. The day the trust money stopped going to Amber and started coming to me directly. The day I would officially be an adult with my own resources. The day she planned to kick me out. I walked to the living room window and looked out at the Queen Street below, people hurrying past, cars honking, a dog walker struggling with 3 separate leashes. A whole world out there that had no idea that my entire existence had just tilted on its axis. I didn't know yet that I was going to expose her. I didn't know about the DNA testing, or the financial fraud, or the systematic deception that was about to come crashing down. I just knew that I was standing in my sister's apartment, the apartment I thought we shared, that I thought was our home, and I felt more alone than I had since the day my parents died. The microwave beeped again, a lonely sound in the quiet kitchen. And that's when I decided I needed answers. And I was going to find them. Hashtag chunk 2, the investigation begins. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, the small twin bed in the small bedroom that apparently cost Amber so much money to maintain, and listened to the apartment around me. At around 2 a.m., I heard her come home from her shift at the hospital. She was humming. Actually humming. Some pop song I didn't recognize. I heard her check on the kids, heard her bedroom door close, and then nothing but the sound of the city bleeding through the thin walls. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. Instead, I lay there in the dark and planned. By morning, I had a problem. I had no idea where to start. Amber kept her life compartmentalized. Her phone was locked with a fingerprint I couldn't access. Her laptop was in her bedroom. She had 2 separate credit cards that I knew of, and God only knew how many accounts I didn't know about. The financial fraud she'd mentioned in the phone call was clearly real, men sending child support for children that might not be theirs, but how would I even prove something like that? DNA results, she'd said. Someone had taken DNA tests. The idea formed slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical bath. If there were results, they had to be somewhere. And if I was going to understand what was happening, I needed to find them. I went through my day like a ghost. I had an online class at 10 a.m., I was doing community college, another thing Amber managed to remind me about whenever I suggested transferring to a 4-year university, and I sat through a lecture on business ethics that felt like it was designed specifically to mock me. The professor was talking about financial fraud, about how trust is the foundation of all relationships, about how deception destroys everything it touches. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. I hadn't decided which yet. Around noon, I texted my best friend Jordan, can I come over? Need to get out of the apartment, Jordan, who had been my best friend since high school, showed up 40 minutes later in his beat-up Honda Civic with coffee and no questions asked. That's the thing about Jordan, he never pushed. He just existed in your space until you were ready to talk. Your sister being annoying, he asked as I got in the car. The irony was so sharp I almost choked. Yeah, I managed. Something like that. We went to our usual spot, this little Vietnamese place in Jackson Heights that made the best pho in Queens. Jordan ordered his usual, rare beef, extra basil, and I ordered the same thing I always ordered, tofu, because I've been vegetarian since high school, though Amber always forgot this when she made dinner. We sat in the corner booth, and I stared at my soup while Jordan talked about his new job at a tech startup. They're actually cool about remote work, he was saying, so I'm thinking about moving out to Brooklyn, maybe get my own place instead of dealing with my parents. You should do that, by the way. Get your own place. You're old enough. I looked up from my phone. I can't afford my own place. You could if you wanted to, he said, matter-of-factly. Your parents left you money, right? Amber mentioned it once, like a year ago. Said you'd be set up once you turned 25 or something. My throat tightened. Yeah. In June. Well, there you go, he said, slurping noodles. You'll be fine. If only he knew. After lunch, I asked Jordan if I could use his computer for something. He didn't ask what, just handed over his laptop. I sat in his apartment while he played video games with the volume low and started searching. First, I looked up the basics, DNA paternity testing services. There were dozens. Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage, plus the medical ones that were more expensive and legally binding. Amber's conversation had mentioned the DNA thing, like someone had promised to handle it. Like results had been promised and then destroyed. Then I did something that made me feel like I was crawling out of my own skin. I searched for Marcus paternity test queens. Nothing specific came up, obviously. But I did find a forum post from a guy named Marcus who was asking about how to handle a situation where a baby might not be his. No details, just a desperate post from 4 years ago asking if other men had been through this. The responses were brutal, some supportive, some telling him to demand a test, some telling him to walk away. I didn't know if it was the right Marcus. But my stomach twisted anyway. Next, I looked up child support laws in New York. This was harder to parse, but the basics were clear. If a man was paying child support for a child that wasn't biologically his, and he could prove it through DNA testing, he could potentially stop payments and even recover what he'd already paid. It was called paternity fraud, and it was actually illegal in some circumstances. Which meant Amber wasn't just lying to the men involved. She was committing fraud. Against multiple people. For years. The realization hit me differently than the first one had. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a crime. I closed the browser and gave Jordan back his laptop. Find what you needed, he asked, not looking away from his game. Not yet, I said quietly. That night, I came home to find Amber in the kitchen making dinner. She was cooking chicken and rice, and she was still humming that same song. She looked up and smiled at me, and I saw it clearly now, the practiced warmth, the performance of it. How many times had she looked at me like that while lying directly to my face? Hey. I was hoping you'd get home soon. Ethan's been asking for you all day. Okay, I said, and walked to my room before she could see my face crumble. That night, I made a decision. I was going to find out everything. Not to get revenge, I didn't even know if I wanted revenge yet. I just needed to understand. I needed to know who my sister really was, because the person I thought she was didn't exist. She was a stranger wearing a familiar face, and I needed to figure out what that meant for me, for my future, for everything. I pulled out my phone and started a new note, one I titled simply, Evidence. And then I wrote the first entry, phone call, March 15th, approximately 7:45 p.m. Amber discussing plans to cut contact after June 14th, references to paternity fraud and DNA testing, Below that, I wrote, next steps, Find the DNA results. Find financial records. Talk to Marcus. Figure out the other men. I stared at the list for a long time. This was going to be complicated. And messy. And probably going to blow up my entire life. I typed one more line at the bottom. She started this. I'm just going to finish it, Chunk 3. The problem with deciding to investigate your sister is that you have to live with her while you do it. I'd spent 2 weeks pretending everything was normal, and it was exhausting in a way I hadn't anticipated. Every conversation felt like a minefield. Every smile from her made my skin crawl. Every time she touched my shoulder or asked how my day was, I had to fight the urge to flinch away. Jordan had suggested I just move out. Get a roommate, he'd said casually, like I hadn't already done the math 1,000 times. Rent in Queens was impossible on what I made from my part-time job at the bookstore. And my inheritance wasn't accessible until June 14th. I had exactly 2 months to figure this out while living in the apartment with the person I was building a case against. The DNA results were the first problem. I'd searched Amber's bedroom twice when she was at work, moving carefully through her dresser, her nightstand, even her closet. Nothing. No test kits, no printed results, no emails about pending reports. She'd either destroyed the evidence already, or it was somewhere else entirely. Could be at work, Jordan suggested when I called him from the bookstore during my lunch break. A lot of people use their work address for stuff they don't want at home. He was probably right. Amber worked in the pediatrics department at Queen's Medical Center, which felt darkly ironic given what she'd done. But I had no way of getting into her work email or accessing her mail there. The second problem was Marcus. I'd found him, or at least I thought I had. After Jordan went to sleep one night, I'd used his computer again and searched through public records. There was a Marcus Chen in Queens with a son named Ethan who was currently 7 years old. Amber's Ethan was 7 years old. My hands had shaken as I wrote down his address. But then what? I couldn't exactly show up at his door and ask if his child was actually his. And I had no proof that he was the Marcus from Amber's phone call. It could have been Marcus Rodriguez or Marcus Williams or any number of people. The name was common enough that searching for it online was like trying to find a specific grain of sand. The third problem was that I was starting to crack under the pressure of pretending. It happened on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after I'd made my evidence note. I was in the kitchen making tea when Amber came home early from her shift, still in her scrubs, her hair pulled back in the messy bun she wore at work. She looked tired, actually tired, and for a moment I felt something shift in my chest, something dangerously close to sympathy. Bad day? I asked before I could stop myself. She sighed and started changing out of her scrubs right there in the kitchen, which was something she'd always done and I'd never gotten used to. One of my patients coded. 7-year-old. We got him back, but... She trailed off, pulling on a t-shirt. Just one of those days where you remember why the job matters, you know? I stared at her. She was talking about saving a child's life while simultaneously running a fraud scheme that would destroy multiple families if exposed. The cognitive dissonance was so profound it made me dizzy. That's good though, I said carefully. That you saved him. Yeah. She smiled at me, and it was genuine this time, the kind of smile that belonged to the person I thought she was before March 15th. How was your day? Fine, I lied. Just work and class. She nodded and started making dinner, and I went to my room and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. I was at Jordan's apartment on a Saturday afternoon, ostensibly to help him pack boxes for his potential Brooklyn move, when his mom called him about his cousin's wedding. He put her on speaker while folding clothes, and she started going through the guest list, asking him who he was bringing. No one, Jordan said. I'll just come solo. You should bring that nice girl who's always at your apartment, his mom said. What's her name? The one with your sister who's always talking about healthcare stuff? My hands froze mid-box. What? Jordan said, confused. Your friend's older sister. The nurse? Or doctor? She came to that thing at your house, like 2 years ago. She was talking about her medical training or something. Very impressive. Didn't she have kids? Jordan looked at me. I shook my head furiously. Oh, maybe I'm misremembering, his mom said. Never mind. Just bring someone nice, okay? After he hung up, Jordan turned to me. Does Amber ever talk about her job? Like, in detail? Not really, I said, which was true. She mentioned patients in general terms, privacy laws and all that, but rarely discussed specific work stuff. Why? I don't know. My mom seemed to think she was a doctor or something. I thought she was just a nurse? I felt something click into place. She's a nurse. But she might mention training stuff. She's always talking about certifications and continuing education requirements. Which meant she had colleagues. People who knew her. People who might have heard her talk about her personal life, her kids, the men in her life. That night, I created a fake Facebook account. I did it carefully, using a random name, a stock photo of someone else's face, no details that could be traced back to me. Then I searched for employees at Queen's Medical Center in the pediatrics department. I found her there in the staff directory with a photo from the hospital website, Amber Mitchell, RN, pediatrics department. And in her Facebook friends list, which was public, I could see her coworkers. Dozens of them. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was about to start reaching out to people, asking questions, creating connections that could lead back to me. One wrong move and this could fall apart. Or worse, it could blow up before I had all the pieces. But I also couldn't afford to wait much longer. June was coming. In less than 2 months, I'd have access to my money, and Amber would have the excuse she needed to cut me out. I needed to move faster. I started composing a message to one of Amber's coworkers, a woman named Patricia whose profile indicated she worked in the same department and had been tagged in photos with Amber at work events. Hi Patricia, I typed, then deleted. Too direct. I tried again, *K. I'm doing some research about pediatric nursing programs and saw you work at Queen's Medical Center, *. My cursor hovered over the send button. This was it. This was the moment where I stopped being someone gathering evidence and became someone actively building a case. This was the line I couldn't uncross. I thought about Amber humming in the kitchen. Amber holding my hand at my parents' funeral. Amber lying to multiple men for money. Amber planning to abandon me. I hit send. #Chunk4. Patricia responded within 6 hours. *K. Always happy to talk about the nursing field. What specifically are you researching? I stared at the message for 20 minutes before responding. My heart was hammering in a way that felt disproportionate to what was actually happening, a simple conversation with a stranger. But this was the moment where my plan moved from theoretical to real. Every word I typed was a commitment. I'm interested in how nurses balance demanding careers with personal life, I wrote back. Especially single parents in healthcare. I noticed you work with Amber Mitchell? I'm trying to get perspectives from different people in the field, It was vague enough to be believable, specific enough to be interesting. I hit send before I could second guess myself. The response came back even faster this time, *Go. Amber's great. Yeah, single parenting in nursing is rough. The shifts are brutal, childcare is expensive, and people can be judgmental. Why do you ask? I chose my next words very carefully. Just trying to understand the reality behind the Instagram version, you know? How do people actually make it work? Asterisk. Patricia's next message came with a link to a private Facebook group for women in healthcare. Join this group, she wrote. Asterisk, there's a whole discussion thread about co-parenting, support systems, financial stress, all of it. Might be useful for your research. Asterisk. I joined the group under my fake name and immediately found the thread Patricia had mentioned. There were dozens of comments from nurses and doctors discussing childcare costs, custody arrangements, child support, paternity issues, custody fraud. It was like watching people confess their secrets in a semi-anonymous space. And then I saw a comment from someone with the username AmberM_RN, asterisk, the system is broken. I have 2 kids by 2 different guys, and neither of them pays what they should. Everyone thinks I'm doing fine because I'm a nurse, but childcare alone is $2,400 a month. I'm barely keeping my head above water, and no one understands that. Asterisk. I read it 3 times, my mouth going dry. She was complaining about not receiving adequate child support while simultaneously running a fraud scheme to extract money from men under false pretenses. She was presenting herself as a victim in a public forum while victimizing others. The hypocrisy was so staggering that I had to step away from the computer. I found Jordan in his kitchen, making sandwiches for lunch. He took one look at my face and set down the knife. What happened? I told him about the Facebook group, the comment, the surreal experience of watching my sister unwittingly expose her own fraud to strangers on the internet. He listened without interrupting, then sat down heavily. Okay, he said finally. So now you have her own words admitting she has 2 kids by 2 different guys, and implying financial issues with the fathers. That's actually huge, right? That's not hearsay. That's her, voluntarily posting about it. But it doesn't prove she's lying about paternity. It just proves she has 2 kids with 2 different men. That could be true. Right, but it establishes a pattern of her talking about these guys in ways that match what you overheard on the phone. Plus the financial desperation. That context matters. I knew he was right, but something about this felt different than collecting DNA or financial records. This felt personal in a way that made my stomach turn. I was watching her, reading her private thoughts, building a psychological profile of my sister from her own unguarded words. I need to find Marcus, I said abruptly. The actual Marcus. Not just the name and address. I need to confirm it's the right person. Jordan set down his sandwich. How? I don't know yet. But I did know, and the realization made me feel sick. I could reach out to him directly. Through the healthcare Facebook group, or through other channels. I could become someone else and contact him, ask careful questions designed to extract confirmation that he had a son named Ethan, that he dated someone named Amber, that he paid child support. You're thinking too loud, Jordan said. What's your plan? To message him. Pretend to be someone researching co-parenting or something. Get him to confirm details about his son. That's a lot of deception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, preparing to deceive Marcus in service of exposing Amber's deceptions. I was becoming the thing I was fighting against. I know, I said quietly. But if it gets you the confirmation you need. Jordan didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. We both understood what was at stake, and we both understood that I'd already crossed the line from passive evidence gathering into active deception. There was no moral high ground left to stand on. 2 days later, I found Marcus Chen on LinkedIn. His profile indicated he was a software engineer in Manhattan, currently employed at a fintech company. No mention of children, no mention of personal relationships. Just professional credentials, a headshot, and links to his work history. I started a new fake account. Different name than the one I'd used for Patricia. A professional profile this time, someone working in HR consulting who was interested in co-parenting policies and employee benefits. I sent him a connection request with a generic message about research into family-friendly workplace policies. He accepted the request 4 hours later. Okay, now what? Jordan asked when I told him. We were at his apartment again, both pretending to work on our own projects while actually just sitting in anxious silence. Now I wait for the right moment to reach out. I can't be too aggressive. If he gets suspicious, he might warn Amber. And if Amber finds out what you're doing? I didn't answer. I already knew what would happen. She'd deny everything, or she'd do what she was already planning to do, cut me out, leave me with nothing. But at least then I wouldn't be living in an apartment with someone I was actively investigating. At least then the pretense would be over. That night, I lay in my bed listening to Amber move around the apartment. She was on the phone with someone, laughing about something, her voice warm and animated. For a moment, I could almost convince myself that I'd imagined the phone call, that I'd misunderstood, that everything was fine. Then she said, I know, right? Just 2 more months and I'm free, and my hands clenched into fists. I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to Marcus Chen. It was time to stop waiting. Time to stop gathering evidence and start using it. Just one message. Just one small push. Time to watch the first domino fall. #chunk5. The message sat in my drafts for 3 hours before I sent it. Hi Marcus, I'd written. Asterisk, I came across your profile while researching workplace family policies, and I noticed you're in fintech, a field that's notoriously demanding for parents. I'm conducting interviews for a piece on how tech professionals navigate work-life balance with children. Would you be open to a brief conversation? Asterisk. It was carefully constructed. Plausible. The kind of outreach a legitimate researcher might make. And it was a lie wrapped in professional language, designed to manipulate someone into confirming information that would destroy his life. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. His response came the next morning at 8:15 a.m. Asterisk, thanks for reaching out. I'd be happy to help, but I should mention up front, I don't have kids, so I'm not sure how helpful I'd be for your research. Asterisk. My entire body went cold. Don't have kids, 3 words that shattered everything. I must have misheard the name. Or there were 2 Marcus Chens in Manhattan. Or Amber had lied about the father's name entirely. I showed the message to Jordan, who read it twice and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Okay, he said carefully. That doesn't mean anything. There could be another Marcus. But what if she made the whole thing up? What if there is no Marcus? What if the different guys are just fictional? Then she's committing an even more elaborate fraud, Jordan said. Which, honestly, tracks with everything else you've found. I spent the next 6 hours in a spiral of research, searching for every Marcus Chen in the Manhattan area who might be the right age, might have a son, might have dated a nurse named Amber Mitchell. I found 17 Marcus Chens. None of them had obvious connection to Amber or to a child named Ethan. By evening, I was exhausted and no closer to answers. I was also becoming uncomfortably aware of how much time I was spending on this, how much it was consuming my thoughts, my conversations with Jordan, my entire existence. I was becoming obsessed. I was becoming the kind of person who spent entire days trying to catch her sister in a lie, and maybe that person wasn't someone I wanted to be. I think I need to talk to her, I said to Jordan. About what? I don't know. Something. Anything. I need to know if I'm crazy. Jordan set down his phone. You're not crazy. But confronting her is risky. If you got pieces of her plan figured out, and you tip your hand, she'll just accelerate everything. She'll kick you out sooner. She'll hide financial records. She'll change her story. Maybe I don't care anymore. Maybe I'd rather just know. But that was a lie, and Jordan knew it. We both knew what would happen if I confronted Amber. She'd deny everything. She'd turn it around on me, make me feel guilty for not trusting her, for snooping, for investigating her like a criminal. She'd cry. She'd remind me that she'd raised me, that she'd sacrificed for me, that I owed her loyalty. And I'd apologize, and I'd feel terrible, and the uncertainty would eat at me all over again. That's what Amber did. She made you doubt yourself. Instead of talking to her, I did something worse. I called my aunt. My Aunt Linda, my dad's older sister, was someone I'd grown distant from over the years. Amber had gradually created distance between us, mentioning how judgmental Linda was, how she never really supported the family, how her visits always left Amber feeling small. I'd accepted these characterizations without ever questioning them. But now, sitting in Jordan's apartment on a Friday evening, I realized I had no one else I could safely talk to. Honey. Linda's voice on the phone was warm and surprised. How long has it been? Too long, I admitted. I was actually hoping I could come see you this weekend. There's some stuff I need to talk about. There was a pause. Is everything okay? I don't know, I said honestly. I think I need advice from someone outside the situation. Linda lived in Westchester, about 40 minutes north. She and her husband had a house with a garden they loved, and she'd always invited Amber and me to visit. Amber had always found reasons we couldn't go. Come tomorrow, Linda said without hesitation. Come early and stay for dinner. We'll talk about whatever you need to talk about. After I hung up, I felt both relieved and terrified. I was about to open Pandora's box. Once I started telling someone outside the situation what I'd found, once I started vocalizing the suspicions that had been building in my head, there would be no taking it back. I would be making this real in a way it hadn't been before. I told Amber I was going to a study group the next day. She barely looked up from her phone. Okay, be back by 9, she said absently. I might have a friend over. The drive to Linda's house felt surreal. I kept second-guessing myself. What if I was wrong? What if Amber had legitimate explanations for everything? What if my suspicions were the paranoid fantasies of someone who'd been hurt and was looking for ways to hurt back? But then I thought about that phone call. About Amber's voice, so cold and calculating. About her talking about me like I was an investment that was about to mature and become worthless. Linda hugged me at the door, and I almost broke down right there. She was wearing a blue apron, she'd been cooking, and she smelled like her garden and cinnamon. She looked like family in a way that suddenly felt very precious. Come on, she said, pulling me inside. I made your favorite. And we're going to talk about whatever this is. We sat in her kitchen, at the same table where Amber had sat years ago before she'd started making excuses not to visit. And I started telling Linda everything. The overheard phone call. The searches I'd done. The inheritance trust. The lies about child support. The plans to abandon me in exactly 2 months. With each detail, Linda's expression grew more serious. By the time I finished, she was gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Oh, honey, she said finally. I believe you. Those 4 words, I believe you, made me realize how much I needed to hear them. How much I'd been doubting my own perception, my own memory, my own interpretation of events. What do I do? I asked. Linda was quiet for a long time. First, you need to understand something, she said slowly. If you go after her with this, if you expose her, there's no going back to the way things were. You need to be absolutely certain that's what you want, because once you burn that bridge, it's gone forever. I thought about Amber in the kitchen, humming. Amber at my parents' funeral. Amber lying to multiple men. Amber planning to abandon me. I'm sure, I said. Linda nodded, and then she reached for her phone. We need to talk to my lawyer, she said. Before you do anything else, we need to make sure you're protected. #Chunk6. Linda's lawyer, Robert Chen, a different Chen, I thought with hysterical irony, turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Patricia Morrison who worked out of a small office in a converted brownstone. Linda had called her on the drive over, and Patricia had somehow fit us in on a Saturday afternoon, a favor that Linda clearly called in, based on the way she spoke to her. Tell me everything, Patricia said, gesturing for us to sit in her office, which was organized with a kind of controlled precision that made me feel simultaneously safer and more terrified. A woman like Patricia didn't keep things organized this way unless she'd seen the absolute worst of what people could do to each other. I went through it all again. The phone call. The financial records I documented. The DNA testing kit I'd ordered but hadn't used yet. The messages from the men. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes in shorthand that I couldn't read. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Okay, she said. First, the good news, you haven't done anything illegal yet. You're living in her home, you're not hacking into accounts you don't have access to, and searching for public information online isn't against the law. However, she held up a finger, I need you to understand what you're contemplating. What do you mean? I asked. You're talking about exposing someone's paternity fraud to employers, family members, and the men involved. That's defamation territory if any of it isn't provable, and it's a personal destruction campaign even if it is. People have sued for less. And more importantly, she leaned forward, she's your sister. She's the only family you have left besides Linda. Are you prepared for the consequences of that? She's abandoning me, I said quietly. She's using me. I believe you, Patricia said, and I felt that same relief I'd felt with Linda. But belief and proof are different things. Let me ask you this, if you expose her, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to get her to change her behavior? Are you trying to punish her? Are you trying to protect yourself? Because those are three very different goals, and they require three very different strategies. I hadn't expected that question. I'd been so focused on the exposure itself that I hadn't really thought about what I wanted the outcome to be. I want her to understand what she's done to me, I said slowly. And I want her to face consequences. I don't want to be invisible anymore. I don't want to be something she can just discard. Patricia nodded. Okay. That's honest, at least. But here's what I'm seeing. You're planning to expose her in a way that will destroy her financially, professionally, and socially. The men involved will likely pursue legal action. Her employer might fire her. Your extended family will know what she's done. And then what? You're still homeless, because even if you stay in the apartment, the relationship will be so poisoned that you won't be able to, and you'll have burned your bridges with her permanently. She was already going to do that, Linda interjected. She was already going to throw her out and cut contact. Yes, Patricia agreed. But right now, the narrator still has some leverage. If she plays this carefully, she might be able to negotiate a better outcome. A financial settlement, maybe. A written agreement about how they'll handle the transition. Some kind of severance package for all the years of unpaid labor and support. I stared at her. You want me to, what? Negotiate with her? Blackmail her? I'm suggesting you think very carefully about what you actually want, Patricia said. Because revenge and justice are not the same thing, and they often require very different actions. After the appointment, Linda drove me to a coffee shop, and we sat in a corner booth while I spiraled. She's right, Linda said quietly. I didn't want to say it before, because I wanted to support you, but Patricia's right. If you go nuclear, yes, you'll hurt Amber. But you'll also hurt yourself. And you'll burn down the one family connection you had left. But I can't just let her get away with this, I said. I'm not saying you can, Linda replied. But there are ways to protect yourself without destroying her. You could talk to a lawyer about your rights regarding the apartment. You could start planning your exit, finding housing, getting a financial cushion. You could even have a conversation with her where you make it clear you know something, without revealing exactly what, and see if that changes her calculus. That's still blackmail. No, Linda said. That's leverage. There's a difference. Blackmail is illegal. Leverage is just understanding your position and using it to negotiate. But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. Because the thing about discovering that someone you love has been lying to you is that you lose the ability to think clearly about them. Every word they speak becomes suspect. Every gesture becomes potentially manipulative. I looked at Linda across the table, this woman who was offering to help me, who was taking my side, and I wondered how much of that was genuine, and how much was about what she stood to gain if Amber's reputation was destroyed. Was I becoming cynical, or was I finally seeing clearly? That night, back in the apartment, I watched Amber cook dinner. She made pasta carbonara, humming to herself, and she looked so normal. So human. So much like the sister who'd raised me that I almost couldn't reconcile her with the voice I'd heard on that phone call. How was studying, she asked, not looking up from the stove. Good, I lied. Got a lot done. Nice. You want to eat in a few? Yeah, thanks. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, eating and making small talk, and the cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. This was my sister. This was the person who'd held me when I cried after our parents died. This was the person who'd fought for custody of me, who'd sacrificed her early 20s to raise me. And she was also a liar. A manipulator. A fraud who'd been systematically planning to discard me the moment I stopped being useful. Both things were true. Both things were real. And I had no idea which version of Amber, the loving sister or the calculating fraud, was the real one. Maybe, I thought as I pushed pasta around my plate, she was both. And maybe that was the most terrifying thing of all. #Chunk7. The next week passed in a strange, suspended state of unreality. I went to classes. I studied. I worked my shift at the bookstore. On the surface, everything looked normal. But underneath, I was living a double life, the dutiful sister who helped Amber with groceries and listened to her complaints about work, and the person who'd hired a lawyer and gathered evidence of her lies. Patricia had given me homework. Real homework, like I was studying for an exam in how to destroy my own family. Document everything, she'd said. Keep detailed records of any conversations where she mentions money, the apartment, your future. Write down dates, times, exact quotes if you can. The more specific you are, the more leverage you have if you decide to negotiate. So I did. I started carrying a small notebook in my backpack, and whenever Amber said something revealing, I'd excuse myself to the bathroom and write it down. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. Amber on the phone with someone, couldn't hear the other end. Yeah, she's still thinking about grad school. I'm not going to help her pay for it though. I've done enough. Then a pause. No, she'll figure it out. She's got to learn that the world doesn't owe her anything. Wednesday, 8:15 p.m. Amber asking me how much money I had saved up. When I said about $3,000, she made a face and said, you should be saving more. You can't depend on me forever, you know. Thursday, 11:22 a.m. Overheard her on the phone again. She's already 24. Most people her age are independent. I'm not her mother. Each notation felt like a small betrayal, a tiny knife I was carefully sharpening. But it also felt like protection. Like I was finally, for the first time since our parents died, taking care of myself. I also did what Patricia suggested and started researching apartments. One-bedrooms in the city were eye-wateringly expensive, $500 to $2,000 a month minimum. My bookstore job paid $15 an hour, 20 hours a week. After taxes, I made less than $1,200 a month. Even with the money from the trust fund, which I'd looked into, and wouldn't fully mature until I was 25, I was looking at a massive gap. The trust was designed to help with education and major life expenses, not to fund a complete escape. I did the math obsessively. If I worked more hours, maybe I could get to $1,500 a month total income. The trust fund distributions, once they fully kicked in, could close the gap. But that was still 6 months away. And that assumed I didn't have any emergencies, any unexpected expenses, any of the million little ways that life could derail careful financial planning. The apartment problem wasn't going away. It was just getting more complicated. On Friday night, Amber announced that we were having a family dinner. Not at home, at a restaurant. With Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol was our father's younger sister, and I hadn't seen her in probably 2 years. She lived upstate and didn't make it down to the city often. She'd come to the funeral, I remembered vaguely. She'd offered to take me in. Amber had politely declined on my behalf, citing stability and school, and Aunt Carol hadn't pushed it. She'd sent birthday cards and the occasional care package, but we'd drifted into that distant family territory where you see someone once every few years and it feels like you're catching up from decades apart. Why? I asked when Amber mentioned it. Because I haven't seen her in forever and she texted wanting to meet up, Amber said. And because it would be nice for you to spend time with family. When's the last time you saw Carol? 2 years, I said carefully. At the funeral. Exactly. You need to maintain those relationships. Carol's still family, even if she doesn't live here. This was rich, coming from someone who was literally planning to sever family ties the moment I turned 25. The restaurant was nice, the kind of place where the silverware outnumbered the plates and the wine list had more pages than most books. Aunt Carol was already there when we arrived, waiting from a corner table. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair grayer, but she smiled widely when she saw us. Oh my God, look at you, she said, pulling me into a hug. You're so grown up. When did you get so tall? I've been this height for like 4 years, I said, but I hugged her back. Dinner was pleasant in that strained way that happens when people who don't see each other often try to catch up. Aunt Carol asked about school. Amber bragged about my grades. They drank wine and talked about relatives I barely knew. I pushed food around my plate and tried not to think about the fact that Amber was sitting across from me, looking like a normal, loving sister, when in reality she was a fraud and a liar. But then, about halfway through the entree, Aunt Carol said something that made me freeze. I've been thinking about you guys a lot lately, she said, looking at Amber. Especially with the trust fund coming up. How are you planning to handle the transition when she's 25? Amber laughed. What transition? Well, you know, the loss of access to the trust fund money. It's been helping with her support all these years, right? Once that responsibility shifts entirely to her, it's going to be a big change. I watched Amber's expression carefully. There was a flicker of something, annoyance? Irritation, that she quickly covered. We'll figure it out, she said lightly. She'll probably be ready to move out by then anyway. Most people her age want their independence. She's living with you though, Aunt Carol said, and there was something in her tone that made me look up. Something that suggested she understood more than I'd realized. I just wanted to make sure you both have a plan. These transitions can be rough if they're not handled carefully. It'll be fine, Amber said firmly. But I could see her jaw tighten. Later, in the car on the way home, Amber was quieter than usual. I didn't say anything. I just sat in the passenger seat and watched the city lights blur past the window, my mind working through what Aunt Carol had said, and more importantly, how Amber had responded to it. She was worried. I could feel it. Something about the mention of the trust fund and the transition had triggered her defensiveness. And that, I realized, meant I had more leverage than I thought. That night, alone in my room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to expose Amber immediately. Not yet. I was going to use what Patricia had taught me. I was going to gather more evidence, build my case more carefully, and then, when the time was right, I was going to have a conversation with my sister where I made it absolutely clear that I knew what she'd done. And then I was going to see what happened when she realized that the person she'd planned to discard had all the cards. It wasn't revenge yet. But it was the beginning of justice. #Chunk 8, the reckoning. I waited until the perfect moment. Not out of mercy, but out of strategy. Patricia had drilled into me the importance of timing, leverage, and leverage again. Never play your hand until you're absolutely certain of the outcome, she'd said during one of our final consultations before I decided I didn't need her help anymore. I paid her in full and thanked her, but I realized I didn't actually want someone else orchestrating my life. I'd spent enough time being manipulated. I was going to do this myself. The perfect moment came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early March. Amber had the day off work. I'd arranged my own schedule so I'd be home, which required lying to my manager about a family emergency. The irony wasn't lost on me. I found her in the kitchen, making coffee. She was still in her pajamas, looking soft and unguarded in the early morning light. This was the Amber I'd grown up with, not the scheming woman in late-night phone calls, but the person who'd stayed up with me when I had nightmares after our parents died. The person who'd taught me how to cook. The person who'd promised she'd always take care of me. We need to talk, I said. Amber looked up, mug halfway to her lips. About what? Sit down. Something in my tone must have alerted her. I'd never spoken to her like that before. She set the mug down carefully and pulled out a kitchen chair, settling into it with exaggerated casualness that didn't quite hide the tension in her shoulders. I know about the paternity fraud, I said. The color drained from her face so completely that I thought for a moment she might actually faint. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. I know about Marcus, David, and James, I continued, laying out the facts I'd gathered like cards in a game of poker. I know that Marcus isn't Marcus Jr.'s biological father. I know that David's been paying child support for a child that isn't his. I know that James has no idea that Emma isn't his daughter. I know about the financial support, the manipulation, the lies. How did you? Amber's voice came out as a whisper. I also know that you were planning to kick me out once I turned 25 and lost access to my trust fund, I said. I have that recorded. Multiple instances of you discussing it with your friends. And I have documentation, emails, bank statements, everything, that shows how you've been using my trust fund distributions to supplement your own income while simultaneously lying to 3 different men about paternity. Amber stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile floor with a sound like a scream. You had no right. I had every right, I said quietly. You raised me. You took care of me when our parents died. And then you decided I was a problem to be solved once my utility expired. So yes, I gathered evidence. And yes, I know a very good family law attorney who specializes in paternity fraud cases. What do you want? Amber's voice had changed. The shock was fading, being replaced by something harder. Calculation. Is this about money? Do you want more money from the trust fund? Because I can help you access it early. I don't want your money, I said. I've never wanted your money. I wanted my sister. The words came out before I could stop them, and I saw Amber flinch as if I'd struck her. I'm not going to expose you, I continued. Not yet. Not unless you make me. She sank back into the chair. Then what? You're going to help me move out. Actually help me, not just tolerate it. We're going to find me an apartment I can afford, and you're going to co-sign the lease because your credit is better than mine. You're going to help me pay the deposit and the first month's rent. And you're going to actually explain to me why you were planning to abandon me, because I deserve at least that much honesty. Amber stared at the table for a long moment. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were red. I was terrified, she said quietly. When Mom and Dad died, I was suddenly responsible for a 12-year-old. I had no idea what I was doing. And the only thing that kept me going was knowing that it wasn't forever. That someday you'd grow up and leave and I could have my own life back. And somewhere along the way, I started to resent you for it. And I made terrible choices to try to build a life that felt mine, with people who didn't know the real me, who didn't remind me every day of everything I'd lost and everything I'd sacrificed. So you lied to them, I said. And you lied to me. Yes, Amber whispered. I did. And you were just going to throw me away. Yes, she said again. The honesty was almost worse than the lies would have been. Almost. What followed weren't dramatic fireworks or some satisfying moment where she begged my forgiveness. What followed was complicated and messy and real. Amber helped me find an apartment, a small studio in a less trendy neighborhood that I could afford with my bookstore income and a small early distribution from my trust fund that my lawyer helped me petition for. She did co-sign the lease. We went to lunch a few times, and sometimes we could talk without the weight of everything hanging between us, and sometimes we couldn't. She also came clean to all 3 men about the paternity situation. Marcus already knew, had always known, and was relieved. David was furious and consulted with lawyers before ultimately negotiating a reduced child support arrangement based on the fraud. James took a DNA test, and it confirmed what we both already knew. He's rebuilding a relationship with his daughter now, and I think he's a better father for knowing the truth. Amber kept her job, though her employer found out about some of the financial discrepancies and she had to do some serious explaining. She started therapy, which I think has actually helped her more than anything else. As for me, I moved out 2 weeks before my 25th birthday, on a Saturday in late spring. Amber helped me carry boxes. We ordered pizza that night in my new apartment, sitting on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually family again. Not perfect. Not uncomplicated. But real. I never had to expose her because in the end, the threat of exposure was enough. And maybe that's the real revenge, not destroying someone, but forcing them to face the consequences of their actions and then deciding whether to actually change. I think my sister is trying. That's enough for me.